How do you determine your overall project budget for your grant application? This includes how you determine your overall project ask and amount. My name is Benjamin Dean from grantgetting.com. I hope you enjoy this video and others like it that are aimed at helping you get more grants. Check out the free download in the description for 7 more tips outside of the 3 that we will cover here today. So, a couple different questions are baked within this question around project budget. One is, how do you create a budget? How do you create it accurately? Another is then how to best, what is the correct or the accurate or best practice in terms of asking for money from a particular funder? What should be asked for? So we're going to touch on a few of these things that's in and around the budget and the ask for a particular application. So number one, in terms of a tip, would be to spend a heavy amount of time, especially if it's the first time writing a grant for a particular project, on the research. Okay. If it's your first time writing a grant application to a funder, you're going to be research heavy because it's your first time engaging with an understanding of what this funder is all about. And conversely, internally, if it's the first time that you've put an actual budget together in preparation for a grant application for one of your programs, you're going to be more research heavy. Okay, these are probably the 2 examples where it'd be more research than there typically would be. So this is number one. The foundation of a successful budget is thorough research. The budget is just, showing somebody how much research you've done, basically. You need to understand every detail of your project and ensure that your budget is comprehensive. You'll typically start by mapping out the project scope. What are the components? What goes into the project? What are the resources that are required? What are the activities that you're going to undertake? What are needed for that? Are there any industry? So that's sort of one set of questions. And another set of questions to ask would be, are there any industry standards or benchmarks that you should consider? One of those might be, if you have a larger team, how much to include on a particular project for training, for learning and training, and in some instances, training certification courses. There might be industry standards to consider there. You might also think about standards in terms of what is needed to break through the awareness bubble in your particular community. How are you going to get someone's attention, a beneficiary, a volunteer, or otherwise somebody that's critical to your processes? What is required to get through to them? Okay. So the key here is to be as detailed as possible as you can first in your thinking about what is required. You want to think of every possible cost that could arise, not just that you hope will arise, excluding the ones that you don't think will arise or are unlikely to arise. Your first step is not to put filters on it. It's just to say, here's all the costs that could be associated with this type of project. So you want to recommend, I would recommend talking with others, if this is new to you, who have done projects similar to this. If you don't feel as though to go to someone in your immediate environment for fear of, it might be seen as competitive, that's okay. I would encourage you not to think that way, but I would encourage you to offer value to them and see if you can get into a reciprocal relationship, but understood completely if you want to go outside of your area to somebody who has completed a similar construction project or a similar outreach activity or an environmental awareness program or whatever it is, and just ask them, we have similar missions, we're in different areas. Can you share your costs with me, your actuals that you had on this project that I saw that you received funding for? They're more than likely going to be glad to do that. You can also offer to sign an NDA where you don't mention that you got this information and you don't tell anybody that you got it. It's just sort of helpful for you in your internal projections. Some grantors have specific expectations for what should be included in a budget. You also want to make sure you review these guidelines or these requirements that they provide before you do your research, because there might be additional research that's needed there. Okay. So this is coming up, just sort of baseline with all of the costs that you might need, that you will need. Putting them into an Excel spreadsheet or some other spreadsheet, categorizing them, utilizing perhaps your own bookkeeping standards is fine to have as sort of your back end document about the project. Okay. If you're writing one grant, it's likely you're writing multiple grants and you will reference this work many, many times. Okay. So there's research that you're doing on the foundation that you're getting the grant from. There's research that you're doing, perhaps finding a few other organizations to benchmark or industry standards to benchmark. Then you have individual research points on the line items. Okay. So you know that you need a new piece of equipment. You need to go out there and you need to get 3 quotes, right? Or whatever, your process is. That's the typical process, is to find at least a couple quotes on that particular item, right? That's research that you're doing. You're bringing that all together. You're compiling all the information to be able to find the actuals on costs. Okay. And then you're going to use that. That's all number 1. Number 2 is to build a detailed budget. Once your research is complete or complete-ish, it's time to build the budget. And this is just a list of your expenses. It's a detailed financial plan that shows funders that you've thought through every aspect of your project. You'll want to be sure to include both the direct cost, those expenses that are directly tied to your project that do not have any other implications in your organization on any other project or program, as well as the indirect costs, such as the manager's time. The program manager's time is likely to be split between this particular program or project and something else. Okay, so as we've talked about in other budget videos, there are ways to do that, which may or may not include the indirect overhead rate. Okay, justifying these costs is crucial, and you'll need to explain why each expense is necessary and how it contributes to the project's success. It is necessary because it contributes to the project's success in this way. Okay, those are 2 separate statements. The next point would be around underestimating your budget. So, it's a common mistake in budget planning to be overly optimistic, to say you can be very, very efficient with your resources. And this can be pretty critical in terms of a mistake, not only if you were to receive the money and then, blow the budget out of the water. What do you do? That is, that's a whole nother thing that we can talk about later. You want to avoid that situation. But just in terms of getting the grant, it is likely, if you're new to writing grants, that those that are reviewing the grants have more experience than you do on what a good budget looks like, or what an accurate or comprehensive budget looks like. So this is an area that you don't want to come across as being uninformed or less informed about. You want to be seen as financially understanding and literate and conservative in that way of speaking. The reviewer seeing a budget that's very low cost, it doesn't automatically mean, wow, look at this organization that plans to do so much with so little. Many times it has the opposite effect, where a reviewer will see a budget that you've trimmed and you've cut, you've been very optimistic with what you can do. They will see that and say, they don't really know what they're getting into. This has got red flags all over it. Okay. So of course, this is one of the balances, but in my experience, you want to be more conservative with what you can do with what inputs than aggressive, if that makes sense. So you want to be realistic, and you make sure your budget actually reflects the needs of your project. You don't want to be too optimistic. Okay. Number 3 then is to actually present your budget clearly. A very clear, well-organized budget document is essential. Funders want to see that their money is being used well and why it's necessary. In many cases, you will have the opportunity to format your own budget document. And my strong suggestion would be to use a template. I have templates. They're linked throughout. But there are also other templates out there. Don't try to make it up yourself. If in the application you have a budget template that you're working with, that's great. You don't have a lot to really think about. You're just filling in the blanks. But if you're making up your own, you want to use the categories and subcategories to organize your expenses and make sure that they are directly tied to your budget narrative or your budget justification section. You want to explain each one. You want, number one, if anything, transparency and competency, which really do go together, to show itself. In terms of transparencies, funders and how things are presented, they appreciate when applications are very forthright, when applicants are upfront about the costs and the needs, highlighting any cost sharing arrangements or any in-kind contributions can strengthen an application, but you'll only get to those if you've done that research and done that legwork. Remember that a well-presented budget not only shows the project's financial needs, but also reflects your organization's professionalism and attention to detail. In many cases, the reporting requirements are for a particular grant are more detail stringent than the application. I don't know if I would say in most cases, but in many cases, that which is required in terms of the follow-up, it takes a level of detail that's greater, much greater than what was needed to put forth a quality application. So if you cannot put together a quality budget document in an application, how much confidence is this funder going to have that you're going to be able to execute a program, evaluate that program, and then report on it 4 times throughout the year, right? Probably not very much confidence. And although that may only be one question in the rubric, the degree of confidence that the reviewer has in fulfilling the grant requirements, that is going to color the rest of the application. That's one of the most important questions that you want to have a very high score on in the application. Okay, so this is all related to budget. And then, getting into a bit of strategy, and there'll be other videos about this too. But then it's like, okay, you're putting the budget together, and a lot of this is being done outside of the understanding of what the grantor is, or who the grantor is, or how much money is available for funding, which is all part of the ask that you make. But the things you want to consider there are funders generally do not want to be the only funder on a project. Okay. They want to know that you have other support. In-kind support is wonderful, but cash is better. In-kind support is wonderful, I'll say again, but partnerships are better. Sustainable partnerships with other parties to provide either cash or in-kind services or products. Those are great things. The funder being the only one might throw up a red flag such that, is this a project that was just created to get this grant opportunity, right? If that is how the application comes across, then it's going to be unlikely to be funded. Okay, so finding other funders or selecting projects that you have or grouping projects that you have such that you have other funding available that can be shown on the revenue side of the budget. Thus far, we've only talked about expenses. On the revenue side of the budget, if you can show that you have other funding secured or likely to be secured, you will increase your chances of getting a grant. What's the right percentage? I don't think there is a right percentage for any funder in general. But if you're looking at one particular funder, you can look at some of their previous grantees and you can just call them and say, I see that you received a grant from this organization. I had a few questions. One of those questions is, how much funding did you have for this project from outside entities? What's the percentage? If you get a hold of 3 or 4 of them, you have a little bit of a range. You can understand what is reasonable just from a small sample size for that funder. So then let's say that comes back as 50% of the funding on average was secured from other funders. Well, that's a pretty hefty margin, maybe, in the way that you're thinking about it. That might dictate right off the bat, in terms of your research that you're doing, which program you want to select within your organization or how you want to frame that program to get funding from this organization. That should dictate your ask, how much you have in there. Now, the other element on the revenue side is how much of your budget remains unraised after this grant is to be received. So let's say you have $100,000 in total cost to complete a project, and you've already raised 75,000 or received commitments or pledges for 75,000. You need 25,000 or 25% of that project. You go to a funder that offers 25,000. That's pretty compelling for that funder to say, this is a project that has 75% of its funding. We put in our max grant amount and they have this project fully funded and they can get it off the ground. Okay, so that's a little bit of the game too, is to find those mixings of opportunities that allow you to get that funder to help close the financial gap. You are applying, what that does, it allows you to say things like, we're applying for funding here in order to close the remaining 12% gap in our budget, in our projected budget, to be able to service X number of people and have this type of outcome. It's a very compelling statement. So if you want 7 more tips on how to perfect your grant budget best practices, be sure to download the free guide in the description below. The additional insights are going to give you even more of an edge, even more of an understanding of things to think about when preparing this budget. Comment below if you have budget questions or anything that you're struggling with relating to budget. I would love to jump in there. And thank you for watching. I appreciate you jumping in, and we'll see you in the next video.